Hello everyone and welcome to the first game we'll be covering from the Superbet poll in the Blitz section. Wei Yi is leading the tournament after 3 days of Rapid, but now we have 2 days of Blitz and everyone can still win the tournament if they have a good day or two. So let's check it out. Praggnanandhaa versus Magnus Carlsen. Pragg coming off from a spectacular victory against Young Krzysztof Duda, and Magnus defeated Kirill Shevchenko in round 1. So let's check it out. It's a beautiful positional game. The pause the video moment will be a little bit different than what you guys are used to. It's not going to be like find a mate in 5. It's more of a going to be what do you play here, because many things are possible, but how do you keep the position alive? So bear that in mind. Let's check it out. Pragg with the white pieces opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to c6 by Magnus, going for the Caro-Kann defense, d4, d5, and e captures on d5. Pragg going for the exchange variation. This is modern chess, so again, everything goes. C captures bishop to d3 and knight to c6. We have c3 and pawn to e6. We have bishop to f4, and as the bishops are nicely slicing the board in two, Magnus wants to trade off a pair of bishops. So bishop d6, we have captures, and now knight to f3, knight g to e7, and both players castle. And here we have rook to e1, and we reach a position that Magnus already had against none other than Viswanathan Anand last year in Croatia, but it was with colors reversed. Magnus was playing white and Anand had the black pieces here, and Anand continued with pawn to f6, which is a fine move, but he lost the game. f6 is actually the second move recommended by the engine. Sometimes it's the first, sometimes it's the second, depending on how long you allow the engine to crunch the numbers. But here we have bishop to d7 by Magnus, which is actually the top move recommended by the engine if you allow it to crunch the position long enough. So Magnus knows what he's doing and obviously has analyzed the game against Anand, and it is now as of move 10 that we have a completely new game. So let's see, can Pragg avenge his master? We have knight b to d2 and pawn to f6 now. We have pawn to b4. In the mentioned game, Magnus played pawn to c4 against Anand, but it's already a different position. We have pawn to b6, pawn to a4, and rook a to c8. The c3 pawn is a backwards pawn, so it makes sense to put pressure on it. We have rook to e3, gaining control of the third rank, but also will be guarding the c3 pawn if needed, and also you can shift it into the attack. Bishop to e8, shifting the bishop over to f7, where it will add as additional support for the e6 pawn. Queen to e1, and of course bishop to f7, nicely defending. We have pawn to a5. Pragg wants to capture on b6 and then lift the rook over to a7 if the knight moves, or to a6 if it doesn't. Knight to f5, attacking the rook, and just rook back to e2. We have knight c to e7 and knight to f1. Queen to d7 by Magnus, and a captures on b6. We have a captures and knight to g3, offering a trade of knights. Knight back to d6, Magnus declines, and now rook to a6. d7 is covered by the queen, so a6 is the next best square. Rook to b8, Magnus defends the b pawn, and now pawn to h4. Now Pragg wants to open up the black king side. Rook f to e8, and now rook e to a2. Preparing to lift the rook, we have knight e to f5, and now rook to a7. Attacking Magnus's queen, rook to b7 defending, and now knight captures on f5. We have e captures on f5, also opens up an attack towards Pragg's queen, and rook to a8, pinning the rook. So rook captures on e1 is impossible. We have rook b back to b8, and now queen to a1. Pragg triples up on the a file. We have rook captures on a8, rook captures on a8, rook captures on a8, and queen captures on a8 with check. Magnus blocks with the queen, but Pragg, controlling more space, of course, wants to keep the queens on the board. We have queen to a7, just puts pressure on the b6 pawn, and Magnus has to defend it. Queen to d8, and now knight to d2. We have knight to e4. Magnus offers a trade of knights. And here Pragg actually tricks him a little bit. We have bishop captures on e4. If you play knight captures on e4, then with both players having a light square bishop and equal material, it's more or less a draw. But here with bishop captures on e4, Pragg keeps the position sort of anti-positional and is looking for ways to still make progress here. And Magnus should play d captures on e4, but he wanted more out of the position. He played f captures on e4. Now he undoubled his pawn, and also he prevented Pragg from getting a pass pawn early on, but now knight to f1, and now the knight is coming to e3, which will be a problem. The knight will have access to f5, but also will constantly be putting pressure on that d5 pawn. And okay, Magnus can defend it with the light square bishop, but look at this, pawn to f5, we have g3 stopping pawn to f4, and now h6, preparing pawn to g5, queen to b7, now adding more pressure to that d5 pawn, and pawn to g5. We have captures, and knight to e3. And yes, you can strike with f4 right away, but then the knight comes to f5, and this doesn't look good for Magnus. So instead, bishop to e6, he does defend both of his pawns, but look at this bishop. I mean, that's a pawn, that's not a bishop. So after bishop e6, queen to c6, putting more pressure on the bishop, and now king to f7. And okay, this is the position that I had in mind that I wanted you guys to sort of analyze. What would you play here? It's a really tricky position, and you could really go a lot of different ways, but feel free to pause the video. What would you play here against Magnus? I also added times for this video because this is Blitz. You know, both players will have little time on the clock. So Pragg has 10 seconds, Magnus has 12 seconds, and of course they get 2 seconds each time they make a move. So this is now bullet chess. What do you play here? Well, I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this brilliant continuation. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is queen cap. I'm just kidding. It is pawn to c4. That is the move. Threatening to capture on d5 3 times, and if Magnus captures, then d5 is marching forward. Of course, Magnus has to capture. There's nothing to think about here. d5 attacks the bishop. We have bishop to d7 and queen to h6 now. While the position is still objectively equal, the white queen around the black king just, roaming freely, is something to definitely be afraid of with 10 seconds on the clock. We have queen to f6. Magnus wants to get rid of the queens, but of course Pragg not interested. Queen h7, and now Magnus plays king to e8. He should play queen to g7, but he played king to e8, and now queen to g8 with check. And now Magnus realizes that if he blocks with the queen, then queen to g6 check picks up the b6 pawn, and then Pragg will have 2 pass pawns, one in the center and one on the queen side. So Magnus plays king to e7, but now Pragg takes the pawn back, knight captures on c4, and now Pragg's position is just winning, and it's not winning by a brilliant combination or anything. It's just positionally winning, and it's very instructive how Pragg does it. Basically, Pragg does it the way Magnus would do it. Here we have bishop to b5, and of course d6 with check. We have king to d7, and just knight captures on b6 with check. We have king captures on d6, and now queen to d5 check, picking up the bishop here, but king to c7, Magnus will also pick up the knight. It doesn't matter. Queen captures on b5, queen captures on b6, now offering a queen trade, but queen captures on f5. We have queen captures on b4 and queen captures on g5, and this is what Pragg saw when he went into this line, that he will just have a queen and pawn endgame where he will be up a pawn. Now the problem for Magnus is that sometimes you can defend the queen and pawn endgame when you're down a pawn, but here it's just a matter of keeping the king away from reaching that g pawn and advancing the g pawn to victory. So Magnus will have a very hard time defending this. King to d7, queen to f4, cutting off the king. We have king to e6, and now king to g2. Queen to d4, and now of course the pawn starts marching forward. Pawn to g5, queen to d5, now threatening some discoveries, but just king g3. Queen d3 check, king to h4, and queen to b1, hoping to get queen to h1 check in. And indeed, if Pragg continues with something like g5, then queen h1 check will be enough for a draw. But of course, Pragg just goes queen f5 check, king e7, and king to h5. We have queen to d3 by Magnus going for queen h3, but the g5. Now the queen covers the h3 square, queen to d1 check, king to g6, and now queen to d3, king to g7. Queen to c4, queen to e5 with check, king to d7, and finally pawn to g6. The pawn is unstoppable. Queen d3, queen to f5 check, king to e7, and queen to f6 with check. King d7. And now queen to g5, king to g8. You could also play queen to f5 check first, sort of to prevent the f pawn from the e pawn from moving forward. But king g8, and now pawn to e3. This is what Magnus finds, and now it's again very tricky. queen to f7 check, king to d6, and now f captures on e3. Again, queen f4 check is very nice because you nicely connect with the pawn, but your g6 pawn would be hanging. So that's why just f captures on e3, queen captures on e3, and pawn to g7, and now there is nothing more to try. Magnus played queen to e5, but just king to f8, and he was in this position on move 69 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Very nice by Pragg. And also, to make it more interesting, this is Magnus's first loss of the event. He went 3 days of Rapid without a loss. He won first game of Blitz, and now he loses to Pragg. So great stuff for Pragg. The only one to defeat Magnus so far could go a long way, regarding the standings. And here you resign because there's no move, there's no check. You could try to be tricky with queen g5, maybe, but still, just queen comes into the game. You give a check, the king hides. I mean, another check, just queen g6 check. You trade, and now queen and king will, of course, easily checkmate the black king. So yeah, very nicely done by Pragg, avenging his master Viswanathan Anand, the teacher, who lost to Magnus in this exact same round, only with colors reversed last year in Zagreb. Pragg is the victorious in this one. And yeah, I mean, Pragg won this game how Magnus would have won this game. So brilliant stuff by Pragg. So yeah, that's the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Michael Hildebrand, Fred Ackerman, chess legend, uncle at the bar, and friend at the library for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.